Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah,
Good
good.
afternoon, sir.
I'm audible?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yeah, very nice. So when do we start?
We start at 11:30, sir?
11:30. So it's still 5 minutes there, no? Okay.
Yeah.
Jaya, the guest speakers are the same or it has been changed?
No, sir, it's the same.
Same, no?
Yeah,
1,
yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5 hours. Okay, thank you.
It's just that we do not have anyone from the ministry.
Okay,
And
okay.
after you, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 speakers.
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, fine. And who's doing the closing?
Mr. Manikam.
Okay. Mr. Manikam.
Yeah, he's working committee member, sir. He'll be presenting the vote of thanks. Let's see.
Jaya, hi. Am I audible well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
So I'll be sharing a presentation, when the time comes there, and then I'll kind of talk about it.
Okay. You have a presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Yeah. A very good morning, everyone. We have gathered on this platform to join this session on strengthening the role of MSMEs in the India-ASEAN regional value chain, which is being held during the ongoing India-ASEAN Engineering Partnership Summit. We have an array of speakers here, and to start with, I would like to invite Mr. Tarvinder Singh Bhasin, past chairman and chairman Committee on Trade with ASEAN countries, to deliver his welcome address.
A very good morning. First of all, let me accord a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers, guests on this virtual floor of strengthening the role of MSMEs in the India-ASEAN regional value chain. Well, we have with us Mr. Neeraj, partner, CEO, India Global and Head ASEAN Corridor, KPMG in India. We have Dr. Subhash Sasidharan, Associate Professor of Economics, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Dr. Jayant Menon, Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, Singapore. Then we have Mr. Dr. Faisal Ahmed, Associate Professor of International Business for School of Management, New Delhi. Mr. Ravi Berry, Managing Director, Berry Udyog Private Limited. And Mr. Manikam, Working Committee Member of EAPC, India. Well, let me at the onset also extend my warm welcome to all the attendees in this session on strengthening the role of MSMEs in the India-ASEAN regional value chain. Both India and ASEAN region has strong presence of micro, small and medium enterprises across various sectors. As per the Asia SME Monitor 2020 by ADB, MSMEs in the ASEAN region account for almost 97.2% of all enterprises and almost 70% of the employment. At the same time, its contribution to the GDP of the region and export from the region is 41% and 20% respectively. Similarly, in India too, MSMEs play a significant role in the economy. The total contribution of India's MSMEs to the country's GDP is around 30% and exports is around 40%. One third of the country's total manufacturing gross value of output is contributed by the manufacturing MSMEs. At the same time, the industry creates approximately 11.10 crore jobs in the rural and urban areas. Given the importance of MSMEs in both regions and the connectivity India shares with ASEAN through the Northeast, a regional value chain involving the MSMEs in the both region can be built, which will eventually accrue benefits to both economies. It is to be noted here that the significance of MSMEs in both regions have compelled the respective governments to adopt a number of steps to encourage their growth. From India's side, crucial policy initiatives such as Make in India and Digital India have opened up new opportunities for the MSMEs. On the other hand, the ASEAN members have continually promoted internationalization of the MSMEs through participation in key global value chains. Therefore, an regional value chain between the two regions would also enable MSMEs for regular exchange of technology and the best practices, which will at the end benefit the industries in both regions. Additionally, a strong regional value chain between India and the ASEAN would increase the competitiveness of our MSMEs and the leverage their bargaining power in the global market. In this context, engineering sector can provide a number of opportunities for collaboration in specific areas, including auto parts, machinery, and the parts, etc. The COVID-19 pandemic has in many ways pointed the issues with large global value chains. In this context, the regional value chains can play a crucial role in the global trade. With the recent projects for improving connectivity and the policy importance of MSMEs would surely help both India and the ASEAN build solid regional value chains in this region. Events like today's summit would be especially helpful in identifying the areas collaboration and promoting exchange of ideas. I sincerely congratulate my EPC colleagues for organizing this event. I once again welcome and open the floor for all the distinguished guests to put their views across. Thank you and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Basim, for setting the tone of the session. I would now like to invite Mr. Neeraj Bansal, Partner, CEO, India Global and Head Corridors, ASEAN, Hong Kong and Taiwan, KPMG in India to deliver make his presentation. Mr. Bansal, please.
Thank you, Mr. Basim, and thank you, Jaya, for this opportunity. It's a privilege to be with you all of you today. Let me just take a few seconds and start my presentation. Jaya, is my presentation visible?
We cannot see the first slide yet. Yeah, now it's starting to share the content.
Okay. Maybe just a couple of seconds here. So while the presentation comes up, essentially what Mr. Basim said, and also the way the ministry is. Can we see the presentation now?
Yeah, we can see the presentation.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much on that. So, like what Mr. Basim was also highlighting, and the ministry has also said that MSME have a very significant and strong emphasis, from the contribution they have for the Indian economy, and there are strong parallels, to that from an ASEAN perspective as well, where individually ASEAN countries are also benefiting from the MSME participation in their own countries at the current time. It's been estimated by the ministry that the that India will have a record exports to the ASEAN region in the current year, in the FY22, and this will be pivotal for the economic growth for India as well as the ASEAN region, given the rising consumption, middle-class population, and also the rapidly developing skilled workforce, and also the evolving digital connectivity that we see. And Mr. Bachin also highlighted on the Digital India program that the country is running as well there. Collectively, India and ASEAN account for 1/4 of the world's population and have an estimated GDP of close to $6 trillion there, US dollars. So with this, let's look at some of the trade dynamics between the two regions. It's a short presentation. I will be touching upon some of the key elements in this area. Some beginning numbers to see that India-ASEAN trade has been growing steadily since the inception of the India-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement 2010. Exports to ASEAN countries have grown at a CAGR of 2.1%, whereas imports from ASEAN countries have grown at a CAGR of 4.2% in the last decade. Despite exports picking up, especially over the last 5 years, India continues to witness an increase in trade deficit since it faces both certain challenges in exports and also non-tariff measures which have been put up by the ASEAN countries. If you try and get into some more detail, the below part of the slide details out the respective shares that we have with the ASEAN member countries on it. So the top 5 trading partners, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, collectively account for 95% of the total trade in FY21. Singapore continues to be the largest trading partner for us over the last 10 years, and it is also the biggest contributor to FDI in India, with total inflows increasing by over 18% year on year. And last year was a very significant jump that we had seen during the COVID period itself as well. While the whole world had challenges on attracting FDI, I mean, India definitely attracted a significant portion of FDI with a strong jump to get to $60 billion. And a major share had come from Singapore in that, or rooted or transacted through Singapore. We have also seen a strong growth momentum from Vietnam, which has overtaken Thailand to become the 4th largest trading partner for us. And as part of the our India's Act East policy, the ASEAN region has always been of a special importance. And now let's also look at another area where both regions hold a common ground with the role played that by the MSMEs part of it there. This was an overall point of view. Now moving to a little bit on the MSME side. The slide over here is like almost self-explanatory, but the numbers are basically to remind all of us to say that how critical MSMEs are, from a growth and development of India and the ASEAN countries as well. And as Mr. Basin had also said, like each of the countries have been actually taking a lot more steps as well. Even in the recent budget, also we saw certain changes and movement being done by the Indian government aspect of it. Likewise, Malaysia, Taiwan, Singapore have also always come up with measures to promote more and more MSC and more connectivity of the MSC as well. A major milestone for the Indian MSME sector was regarding the definition of the MSMEs that was changed. This is helping companies with a higher investment in turnover also to avail the benefits offered by the government, and also in certain ways it is also helping to minimize the disruption caused by the first wave of the pandemic. Given that the MSMEs, as you can see from here, and all of us know that they have a sizable contribution, let's also look at some of the potential areas where India can improve and minimize its trade deficit. The export potential is strong, and as there is a lot more data on this slide, I'll just let you observe for just a few seconds here. So the left side, we've got the top 25 export commodities, some of them being listed out over here. And on the right side, we've got the country-wise export CAGR that we've had over the last 5 years. So India's export, with respect to these commodities, the top 5 partners have grown at an average CAGR of nearly 70% over the last 4 years. And based on the historical trends, a small share of export to these countries, gold, auto, electrical machinery and equipment are some of the areas which will hold and continue to hold more opportunity for Indian manufacturers and exporters to capitalize. There are opportunities in medical equipment, drugs and vaccines, which are coming much more now from the ASEAN countries, as they are committing to universal healthcare system or national health insurance systems as well. We've seen strong positives from the perspective of Malaysia and Vietnam, from that point of view. The also to kind of help the MSMEs capitalize this better, India and ASEAN countries can also look at devising a structured framework and also an enabling environment for the MSME sectors for this region, and keeping in mind that that there are certain similarities, certain challenges as well there, and also the respective markets hold a lot of promise in this area. And also from an India perspective, it is quite likely that we would leverage our ties with the Singapore government, to revamp our trade strategy here, and in return, India's growth prospects, land availability, the fact that we've got a young and affordable workforce will offer strong opportunities for the Singapore firms as well around research, innovation, startups, fintech, AI, logistics, pharmaceutical, and vaccines aspect of it there. With this, let's quickly move to look at a few areas that how digitization is helping to take our partnership at a strong level. So here, if you see that there are almost like 2 billion people which are living in India and ASEAN countries, and now they are not just using internet, they are actually transacting on internet in a significant way. And as you can see, the gross merchandise value is scheduled to go up in a very significant manner to $834 billion by 2025, and this brings a great investment opportunity for both regions. Digitally empowered MSMEs will also help to align better with the global supply chain. This is a major focus area for the Indian MSMEs as well, since India is a preferred option for companies looking to expand in South Asia. And the government can encourage further as well to MSMEs to sell online, simplify certain export registration norms, improve logistics infrastructure, and also create an ecosystem for alliances between the MSMEs and established e-commerce companies. While we do that, there is also a need for addressing certain amount of roadblocks, and that's where I'll move to the our last discussion on some of the roadblocks which need to kind of get overcome as well. So here if you see that in India there is a limited access to market and finance, and also there is a slower adoption of new age technologies, along with what we are all aware that there are still exists certain amount of complicated policies that we have and approval process that we have there, which has been a strong barrier also for export by MSMEs in India. The pandemic, on the lower part of the slide, as you can see, the pandemic has also added to our difficulties here. It is making them challenging for the MSMEs to earn profits or reach break-even point, also to decide on retention of the employees as well there, and at the same time they're getting pressure to reduce cost and meet the commitment in terms of financial obligations, where MSME had taken larger set of loans as well there. This is kind of also looking to force several companies to scale down as well. As you can see on the slide, like 59% of the startups and MSMEs are likely to scale down, shut down, or sell themselves in 2021 there. And it's not that the governments are not aware of this. So like I was saying in the initial part also, while there have been many programs that the governments have launched on it in India and also in the ASEAN side of it, to see that how some of these issues can get resolved, or at least the pain and the pressure for those issues can get reduced over there. So which is where we see more discussions being done by the government also, with engagement, wider engagement with the MSME aspect of it there, and also certain measures being taken to see that how you can have more credit inflow, credit offtake by the MSMEs, and also supporting with more market access as well, with availability of more information on this. So we have very limited time today on this discussion. So I mean, this is a topic where lot more can be said and discussed as well. But with this, I will bring this to a close. And I again thank all the speakers, organizers, and the audience today with us on the session, for their time. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic that we will all together work towards creating a strong enabling environment, and for the MSME perspective, both in India as well as from a ASEAN region as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bansal, for your very insightful presentation. And now our next speaker is Dr. Subhash Shashidharan, Associate Professor of Economics, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, who will be making a presentation. Dr. Subhash, please. Thank you, Mr. Bansal.
Thank you. The slides are visible and I'm audible as such. Thank you, ma'am Jaya, for the invitation and also the participants for joining in this session. So I'm going to talk about the role of MSMEs and the regional value chains. But of course, this talk is probably going to be centered a little more about whether it's regional value chains or global value chains. We are going to see that, our role in the global value chains or RVCs are rather limited, especially from the MSME sector's contribution point of view. So let me just begin by a statistic which probably everybody knows, and thanks to the pandemic, this statistic is becoming extremely popular, is the significance of the MSME sector in India. So this is a number which is being put out. India's, the industrial landscape is filled with MSMEs, especially the micro sector, which is like more than 99% of the total MSMEs, while the rest of the segment, like the small and the medium enterprises, account for 0.52 and 0.01, which is rather minuscule. But the importance of this sector is evident, especially from the manufacturing sector's point of view. Is like this is a very vibrant sector which produces more than 6,000 products, which is like pretty much a rosy story about the MSME segment. And when it comes to the contribution in terms of the GDP, as Mr. Neeraj has already mentioned about, the 30% contribution of the GDP comes from the MSME sector, and the employment is also generated by this sector. And at the same time, if you look at the total exports, I think he has also mentioned this, 40% of the total exports in 2017-18, it has further increased to 48.1, and probably we'll see, it's going to increase further in the coming few years. But the flip side of the story is even though these statistics looks pretty impressive, going back to 2005-6, the MSME or rather the SME exporters, because the micro firms rarely export directly. So they might be suppliers to some small firms or the medium firms, and most of them are indirect exporters. We had roughly 3% of the units in the registered SME sector actually exported. But the recent estimates is that it's like 1.27 thousand lakh of exporting MSMEs, which is just 0.2% of the total MSMEs. So that's not so rosy story. And this is where probably there's a lot of policy interventions can be carried out to make our SMEs internationalize and join with the regional value chains in the ASEAN, where there is some possibility of the SMEs to easily get into the value chains, given that we have this not just the Look East policy, but also the Act East policy also. So what are these regional chains? Because from an economic point of view, regional value chains is just like global value chains, except that it is defined by a common regulatory regime like a European Union or some preferential trade union among the partners or the members like the ASEAN, or something like a regional identity like Latin America. So this is what is the idea of a regional value chain. Except that the trade happens within a particular region or something like a European Union or Latin America. Otherwise, it's pretty much the idea of global value chain and regional value chains as same, probably RVCs are becoming more and more popular, especially after the onset of the pandemic. So, instead of showing the gross exports and such kind of aggregate figures, when it comes to the global value chain or the regional value chain participation, it's basically better to show the statistics from their inputs usage. So we use something called as the backward and the forward participation. So I have given the statistics here for India and the rest of the countries. So if you compare the India's backward and forward participation rate, which is backward is basically how much of your the inputs are coming from abroad and entering into your production here, whereas the forward is basically what is the domestic value added of your exports. So when it comes to the ASEAN, right, the India's backward and forward participation is quite, not so high. I mean, it's very modest compared to, probably the G20 countries or the OECD member countries. And that's where, their SMEs or MSMEs in India can actually add more value and join this, regional production networks or the regional value chains. Some broad trends like this is basically for the GVC participation among the ASEAN countries. All these data is taken from the TIVA database, which is publicly available. So I have given this for the ASEAN countries and the member countries of ASEAN. So Singapore has the highest GVC participation as expected, followed by Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and others. Coming back to India itself, right? I have given the sectoral data of the global value chain participation, right? What probably is interesting from this audience point of view is regarding the manufacturing sectors, the global value chain participation, as well as the backward and the forward linkage. So we can clearly, this is for the India as a whole. It's not for the MSME sector because such data is not available. So in the global value chain participation is for almost a decade. You can see that it's highest in the case of crude and refined and petroleum products, followed by the computer electronics, electrical equipment, and basic metals. So in terms of the backward or the forward participation, you can see that if you look at the sectoral participation, again, the same database is used. I mean, like the backward participation seems to be higher compared to the forward participation. So that's basically something which is really distinguishing India from probably the other ASEAN countries. So regarding our top 10 participation, the top 10 partners, right? You can clearly see that the China continues to be the #1 position. But of course, we also have some presence from the ASEAN countries, especially in terms of the backward participation. Mostly the Indonesia, which dominates it is one among the 10 partners, and also in terms of the forward participation, because Singapore is the highest FTA partner from the ASEAN. Right, it is expected. Singapore is ranked #2 in terms of the forward participation, and then Malaysia. But the remaining ASEAN countries have very limited presence in terms of the backward and the forward participation. So I actually wanted to look at the SMEs GVC participation, right? These kind of data is really hard to get. In fact, probably this is one forum where I can actually appeal that for researchers like us to bring out certain solid studies and reach more policy conclusions. Such kind of nuanced data sets are really required. Probably should allow the researchers to survey these forms and try to understand these issues. But what I have relied is the World Bank Enterprise Survey data, which is slightly probably dated because it goes back to the year of 2014. So if you see that, I mean, this is purely the World Bank classification, not the Indian government's classification, the previous classification by the plant size. It's basically based on the employment we have categorized into small, medium, and large. So strictly, it doesn't adhere to our formal definition of the MSME itself. So if you look at the percentage of firms. There are around 9,000 firms surveyed by the World Bank Enterprise Survey. And the second round is yet to be released. So this is the only round for India which is available. So most of the small firms are exporting indirectly. For this forum, SME is more relevant. So if you look at the numbers, like most of them are exporting indirectly. I mean, at least 10% of the sales. And proportion of the sales is too small when it comes to the direct exports. It's 0.8 only for small. If you look at, again, the percentage, I mean, this is basically a sort of a proxy for our value chain linkage itself. Using material inputs which are of foreign origin or supplies which are of foreign origin, the small enterprise is using only 6.6% of the firms reported they are using something like that. Or and then out of the total inputs which are of foreign origin, it's only 0.8%. Right. So the global value chain is basically you're importing something, adding value, and probably re-exporting back. So basically, that kind of linkage is I mean, we probably this data is slightly dated. Things might have improved, I am sure, but we need to look at the WBS, which is probably going to be released sometime later this year for India, to see whether how much change has happened. So it's not a very vibrant picture what is emerging from the WBS survey, which is sort of indicating to the GVC participation. So, I mean, like, interestingly, because MSMEs face a lot of barriers, especially the micro and the small firms face a lot of barriers. So among the biggest barriers which was reported, again, the source is World Bank Enterprise Survey, is basically the issue of corruption or finance, which is pretty much well known, and the tax rates and the presence of informal sector as a competition. So these are this is basically based on the items which are reported by the managers of these firms in the survey, which are considered as the biggest barriers. So for the small firms or the medium, see, the biggest issue is basically finance and the corruption and the availability of electricity. Probably these indicators, we have to wait and see what's happening. I mean, given the latest round is yet to be released. So just to summarize, what we have seen is basically the barriers of MSMEs. This is not just for India. In general, for developing countries, finance is a big obstacle. So we had a lot of numerous programs targeting the MSME sector for the last couple of years, trying to improve the access. But at the same time, there is still possibility of using the new technologies like fintechs, which will remove this collateral requirements, etc. And then when it comes to exporting, like, because many of the audience who are present here are all directly related, right? One of the stringent requirement is meeting the quality standards. So often the MSMEs find it difficult to meet this quality standards to get into the value chains, and also they suffer from the the low levels of technology. The innovative efforts need to be strengthened, and most importantly, the MSCs, micro and small enterprises, are located in the informal sector. So therefore, we need to bridge the link to make these firms to internationalize. One is formalization of MSC. So we have now a registration portal which is setting up, and going by the media reports, like, it is attracting a lot of firms to come and formally register. And I mean, much of this MSME's competitiveness also has to do with improving the business environment. And we have heard, the ease of doing business index is going up for India in the last few years, which is also going to push this. And then we have this, as the earlier speaker has mentioned, need of digitalization push, but where probably the SMEs or the MSMEs needs a support to get into the regional value chain is the innovation support. Actually, we can learn from the ASEAN how they enable their SMEs to integrate into the regional value chain, and we can sort of borrow their policies. So there should be some fiscal incentives for embedding the MSMEs into the regional value chains. Like, those who are establishing linkages should be given some kind of fiscal incentives, who are establishing relationship with a domestic supplier. not just the international supplier itself. So due to the paucity of time, I'm just quickly wrapping up with some of the policy measures which might help this sector is the trade facilitation measures. I think non-tariff barriers is something which is going to be a big problem given that the tariff rates are already lower. And then there is an active need to create the supplier database. Right? I think the EPC portal also contains very good information about the supplier database. I think this is something which is really, really required if you want to make these enterprises to grow and get into the regional value chains. And there should be some coordinated regulatory framework because each of these, the countries which are located in ASEAN, even among them, there is no coordinated regulatory framework, but there should be a systematic coordinatory regulatory framework, including India, should be carried out. And also, I mean, if you look at the FDI from the ASEAN regions, it's not much. I mean, traditionally, the main source of FDI is mostly from, the US or EU or so there should be a probably active policy to attract FDI, which is really crucial for improving the linkages between the MSMEs and the foreign firms to join with the presence of FDI from ASEAN can really help us in getting into the regional value chains. So with this, I'm just wrapping up. Sorry if I have taken a little more time. Thank you. We can discuss this later part of the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sashidharan, for your detailed presentation. And now I would like to invite Dr. Jayant Menon. He's a visiting senior fellow, Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, Singapore, to present his address.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jaya. And good morning to everyone present. And I'm very pleased to be here. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this important event. I've listened very carefully to the rich presentations that have preceded mine. I've been rapidly adjusting my remarks, actually, to complement what's already been presented. I think what I will do is skip. I was going to say a lot about the history of the relationship between ASEAN and India and so on, but I think that was already covered by Mr. Basin in his original remarks, and also I think the very rich amount of data that's been already presented will complement what I plan to say, which will focus more on policy settings, if you like, on encouraging this MSC integration and regional and global supply chains. And the policy issues, I think that Mr. Subhash covered very nicely earlier on, will focus more on, if you like, the micro aspects. I'll try and speak a bit more about the macro, so that there's more complementarity in what you take away from today's presentations across the board. So I think a useful starting point is to remind ourselves about how this relationship in trade and investment between India and ASEAN has been growing rapidly. It's been formalized, of course, in various ways. The ASEAN-India Trade and Goods Agreement signed in 2009, which entered into force a year later. And also, the free trade agreement in services being concluded in 2012. And all of this was supposed to be, in some sense, reach its pinnacle with RCEP, the ASEAN +6 FTA that was signed late last year. But one, as we all know, India pulled out of almost at the 11th hour. And I think this is a great pity, a lost opportunity, really, for this very specific aspect of supporting the integration of supply chains in the region. This is RCEP's key focus, really, and that's its motivation to consolidate and promote the growth and spread of supply chain. And it's a pity that India chose to pull out. And of course, we hope that the opportunity will not be completely lost and that they'll find a way to come back in sometime soon. Of course, it doesn't seem likely uh, presently, but things can change quite rapidly, as we know, especially if there's changes at the political level. Uh, Nevertheless, despite this lost opportunity, I think, as we've heard already today, there's been very rapid growth in trade and investment between these two parts of the region. Bilateral trade has gone past 90 billion before the pandemic hit, and now it's starting to grow again off its troughs of the pandemic. And I think the future, of course, looks bright going forward. Of course, one of the silver linings of this horrible pandemic that's been often cited is this acceleration towards digital economy, towards the fourth industrial revolution. And although there's been optimism that the 4IR will support all aspects such as artificial intelligence, robotics, blockchain, 3D printing, all of which may have sped up. It is the transition towards a digital economy that has captured our attention. Right, lockdowns and social distancing measures have accelerated both the creation and adoption of new technologies that have enabled work from home, remote learning, and other novel forms of service delivery. I guess this webinar today is a perfect example of sorts of things that I'm talking about. Now, looking forward, firms are already starting to restructure their operations to better adapt to a new normal that will involve less human interaction and be restricted by other forms of risk mitigation regulation. Now, we are often reminded that of the possible negative impacts of this acceleration towards the digital economy, due mainly to the digital divide, and particularly as it affects widening inequalities and displacement of low-skilled workers. These are legitimate concerns and need to be considered seriously as we go forward. But there are several ways in which the race towards the digital economy can either reduce inequality or at least offset it to some extent and increase inclusion. In the remainder of the time that I have left, let me focus on the MSME dimension, the theme of this session today, and relate it to supply chain integration. Now, as you've already heard, the share of MSMEs in the formal sector in both ASEAN and in India is very high. Depending on how you measure them, it's very close to 95% or higher. In fact, MSMEs have become almost synonymous with the informal sector, almost one and the same thing. These MSMEs in the formal and informal sector also account for the majority of employment in both ASEAN and India. And we've seen the numbers presented earlier. But MSMEs are often constrained by lack of access to business and financial services. But now blockchain technology has the potential to dramatically increase the security of cross-border financial transactions and logistics, even in countries where these services are relatively underdeveloped. Therefore, this technology has the potential to benefit the smallest firms in India and in the poorest regions of ASEAN to supply both inputs and final goods. Now, for final goods, the rise of online marketplaces provides platforms for MSMEs in India to access markets in ASEAN and vice versa. The benefits that come from this are obvious, but I think a key dimension is diversification to reduce risks of shocks at home and abroad. The more markets you supply, the greater the reduction in risk from unanticipated shocks. But it is in relation to inputs mainly that the link to supply chains arise. And we have seen some data again from Subhash earlier in terms of the backward and forward linkages relating to this dimension. While the migration of supply chains was driven initially by multinational corporations, its growth and integration is now being driven by MSMEs. MSMEs deliver critical inputs of goods and services through the supply chain and create the basis for domestic spillovers and linkages that can deliver benefits to the local economy. But this can take time, and the local policy settings need to accommodate the process. We've also heard earlier about the World Bank survey results on the barriers to this process. Everything from corruption to finance to all types of very practical constraints like the price and reliability of electricity. All of these things come together to set the policy environment locally in both India and in ASEAN, and these things need to be addressed. And once they are, we have three examples of how they can work. Thailand's Eastern Economic Corridor for the auto sector, for instance, and the SEZs in Penang, Malaysia, for electronics, are testimony to the possibility of how such integration can take place over time. So we should not be too quick to rush to judgment if the linkages are not developing very quickly. But if they don't develop over time, then it is a signal to look more carefully at these policy issues and the policy environment. This is also true for subsequent phases involving upgrading or moving up the value chain, which increases the benefits to the local economy, both directly and indirectly. Right. Yeah, I think someone is speaking. Could you please mute unless you're, could you mute, please? Okay. So undertaking more sophisticated activities over time also increases the possibilities for MSMEs to supply higher value added inputs. And this is a critical dimension, I think, of the increasing the benefits to the local economy from engagement in supply chains. And over even greater periods of time, MSMEs can also migrate and cross borders to get closer to supply chains that they wish to participate in or markets that they wish to serve. Korea is a great example of this growing phenomenon, but it is also happening in many of the original members of ASEAN. While it's no longer MNEs that drive the migration process, but SMMEs that are now following suit. Now, India's engagement with ASEAN, as we have heard, is focused greatly on Singapore, which is mostly services related and a lot of it financial. And now there's increasing attention being paid to the Mekong region. Now, the Mekong region is, of course, a very dynamic region, but I think India needs to also look to increasing its engagement with the rest of ASEAN for FDI. Although trade, as we have seen, is growing strongly with many regional members of ASEAN. So for FDI, the focus has been on the newest members in Mekong, but I think the original members of ASEAN, other than Singapore, hold a lot of potential going forward. And similarly, India can gain from the ASEAN countries other than Singapore coming into their domestic economy. And so they need to be more receptive to their entry, especially in the MSME sector. Okay, so to conclude, although large multinational enterprises have already adopted most of the technologies enabled by the fourth industrial revolution, it is MSMEs that stand to gain the most from them, in my view. The potential exists for these technologies to revolutionize the ways in which MSMEs operate by creating game-changing opportunities to increase participation in supply chains, as opposed to incremental changes in efficiency for the early adopters. As a result of the differences in the magnitude of the potential impacts between MSMEs and MNEs, the technologies of the 4IR can produce outcomes that have huge impacts on MSMEs. But the policy settings have to be right, both in India and in ASEAN. And I think therein lies the challenge going forward. I think, as I started off saying, RCEP would have provided a great opportunity to pursue this and to pursue difficult policy reforms by using the hands are tied argument, by responding to vested interests by saying our commitments externally to an agreement like RCEP is forcing us to make these difficult changes that would have short-run costs but long-run benefits. And hopefully India can come back into the RCEP fold one day. And if it can't, there are other ways of doing this in engaging with ASEAN and growing the India-ASEAN regional cooperation initiatives is also possible and can fill the gaps provided by the lost opportunity with RCEP. So with that, let me thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Menon, for your wonderful insights on the policy issues related to the integration of MSMEs in the ASEAN regional value chain. Our next speaker is Dr. Faisal Ahmed, Associate Professor of International Business, Ford School of Management, New Delhi. Over to Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. So we already had some insightful presentations and observations by Mr. Bansal, Dr. Sasidharan, and Dr. Jayant Menon. In fact, in trade, India and ASEAN already have trade agreement frameworks in the form of FTAs in both goods and services. So significantly, we see that the global value chain has been playing a very critical role, and regional connectivity too plays a very critical role. During the pandemic, we have seen supply and value chain disruptions have been the key geo-economic challenge for conducting business. In fact, the SMEs on both sides, they have faced several challenges and biggest challenges in terms of their credit financing, trade competitiveness, securing the raw materials, and of course, value chain upgradation, which Dr. Jayant mentioned, Dr. Jayant also mentioned about. So for us and for the competitiveness of India-ASEAN trade, the challenge, however, remains. And that challenge is deep-rooted, and that we have to look at it. in a very pragmatic manner. The Honorable Minister of State for Commerce has already stated that in 21-22, India hopes to export goods and services, goods worth $46 billion to ASEAN. And of these, the engineering goods export to ASEAN may be around worth $16 billion. So to meet this target, the MSMEs must play a crucial role. Now, how do they play that role? This will come only when we work toward enhancing our national participation in the global value chain. And that will happen only by focusing on country-specific enablers. So we need to actually establish interlinkages and synergies between both country-specific factors, which we call like macro factors, and the firm-specific factors, which we are calling micro factors. Now we need to decipher that interlinkage actually. So here comes my first argument, and that is we tend not to map the, normally what happens that we tend not to map the, you can say the requirement of lead firms with the SMEs. So most of the studies that we see in our country have focused largely on SMEs, and they have been good ones, but they do fall short on understanding the lead firms requirement and actually mapping that with our SMEs capability to be picked by the lead firms. And to therefore they systematically, I will say, and systemically too, they become how do they become part of the global or regional value chain? So once we do studies which actually help or align our SME capabilities with the that of the requirements of the lead firm, so that they are picked by the lead firm, then the national participation in the global value chain would actually increase. So therefore, we need a meso-level analysis actually that integrates what I list in one of my papers on enhancing GVC national participation. So at least 4 set of enablers that are macroeconomic enablers, geo-economic enablers, strategic enablers, and the geopolitical enablers as well. So from the, like for instance, in the macroeconomic enabler, we talk about foreign direct investments, infrastructural development, or the labor market related issues. In the geo-economic, we will have to consider about how to build the domestic productive capacity, which is a very, very, imminent issue now in the post-pandemic scenario. Also about the diffusion of the ICT, how do we use the information communication technology, and the global, production networks. The role and the participation of the lead firms, of course, is important. In the strategic enabler aspect, we can talk about issues like the internationalization or the export orientation of the firm, or the organizational learning capabilities of the firm. So that is very, very critical, because if we focus only on the macroeconomic aspects, we generally leave or leave away the firm specific aspects. For example, the export orientation of that firm, or the learning, organizations learning capabilities, how do we integrate those things into it? And of course, the geopolitical enablers are already there. So I think only a meso level analysis can enhance the national participation in the global value chain. Another crucial issue that I want to mention is that we find a low level or a partial only a partial convergence between industrial policy and trade policy. One is focusing on enhancing manufacturing, the other one focuses on enhancing export competitiveness. But there remains lack of convergence, and there also remain challenges. For example, we talk about inverted duty structure, or non-tariff barriers are there, or issues related to standards harmonization, or you can say issues which are related to cluster integration, especially in terms of labor-intensive sectors. So this convergence also becomes very, very crucial when we are talking about the alignment of the SMEs or the internationalization of the MSMEs. Next point I want to highlight is that for the MSMEs, the value chain upgradation remains a key concern. And in several sectors, we see that our SMEs continue to be engaged at the lower end of the value chain activities. For example, if we take the example of electronic goods sector, most of the inputs such as parts and components have zero or minimal import duty. Now, this has led to low value added manufacturing also, which is both good and bad. Good in the short term, but SMEs must actually upgrade themselves in value chain toward the end of the continuum as well. And this has also affected the FDI inflows in the sector, which we need to focus on to strengthen our policy initiatives like, for instance, Make in India and toward an Atmanirbhar Bharat that we have been talking about. Now, with many low and middle income ASEAN countries as well, which are either occupying or they are very keen to occupy the lower end of the value chain activities, India need to focus on value chain upgradation now. Also, we can take the note of that ASEAN countries, one critical issue which was raised by Dr. Jayant Menon also about the issue of RCEP. So we can see that the ASEAN countries are already in the RCEP. And few of the ASEAN countries are also in the CPTPP, this Trans-Pacific Partnership. So for us, for India, with no RCEP, no CPTPP, and even China +1 perhaps not yielding the desired result, at least for us, it is eminent that we embrace the idea of mega regionalism, of course, considering and negotiating hard India's economic interest. And finally, I want to make one point that is from a very geo-economic perspective, that we have recently seen that in the G7 summit, President Biden proposed a $40 trillion infrastructure plan known as the Build Back Better World. And it is positioned against China's Belt and Road Initiative. Though United States Build Back Better initiative offers no concrete roadmap, I would say, but sooner or later, some roadmap might come up. So for the SMEs today, such initiatives, whether it is the Build Back Better World B3W led by the United States in G7, or BRI in some of the corridors of BRI, such initiative offer plethora of options for even the ASEAN SMEs. So and they are going to take those opportunities. So therefore, especially in context of like field of heavy engineering, like construction of high-speed railways or optical fiber development, and once special economic zones are established across the corridors. So therefore, we need to prepare our MSMEs for the internationalization process as well. That is very, very crucial. We cannot ignore it at this stage. So I think huge potential exists for our MSMEs, but the development has to be centered around their alignment and integration with the lead firms, and of course with the cluster development and enhanced regional integration in East Asia as well. So this can actually help enhance India's domestic productive capacity to a large extent and at a faster pace. And it can also ensure an enhanced scale of operation that is very, very crucial for us at this moment of time in a post-pandemic, business environment. So that's all from my side. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for outlining the role of MSMEs and their integration in the regional value chain. It's time now to hear about the success story of an MSME, Berry Udyog Private Limited, which is a long-time member of EEPC India. Established in 1978, the company is a globally renowned manufacturer of farm equipment under the brand name Field King. And it is a leading supplier to some of the ASEAN nations as well. We have Mr. Ravi Berry, Managing Director of the company, who will be outlining the success story in this endeavor and the way forward. Over to Mr. Berry, please.
Thank you, Jayaji. And thanks to all the speakers who have given so much of comprehensive as well as insightful study about the various aspects of MSME. The fact of the matter is that MSME has come a long way, and there is a lot of potential which you will see in times to come. Talking about our own company, we had a very, very humble beginning, but the journey has been really good. The fact is that currently we are supplying in about 105 countries, but now talking about ASEAN, we are present in most of the countries. And when we talk about manufacturing sector, the fact is that fundamentals apply. The way they apply on domestic market, they apply on overseas market also. For example, quality, cost, and supply. These are three criteria which are absolutely important, whether it is domestic market or overseas market. So the good thing about being into a business which is connected with agriculture is that it will never be out of business. The fact of the matter is that despite the fact that a lot of industries have suffered last year due to Corona thing, but agriculture machinery business, or for that matter, other business which are connected with agriculture, they showed impressive growth. Of course, we were derailed for say about 40 days when there was complete lockdown, and because of the supply chain being totally disrupted. But it didn't take us long to get back into action, and we were able to more than make up for the loss of sales or whatever. So this is something really encouraging. And ASEAN countries really gave us the opportunity to make better trust. Of course, there was something which affected every country all over the world. But subsequently, the countries had to pick up because agriculture mechanization is the need of the hour, and every country which has agriculture in good volume had to sooner or later import all those machines from India. So as far as ASEAN is concerned, I think the underlying theme about the shared values and common destiny, which they talk about ASEAN countries. And I think there are so much of cultural affinity between India and ASEAN countries, and that makes it easier. Though from country to country and from place to place, there is a different kind of demand for agriculture machinery. But we were able to tweak our machines or our designs to their requirement. So once you are able to satisfy the customers, there is no going back. So things which are important is, as I mentioned earlier, also quality comes before anything else. And then you have to be cost competitive, and then you have to be very particular about timely supplies. Because in farming, if you are not in time, then you run out of business, because there is certain period when agriculture machines work, and if they don't reach in time, they are out of use. So what I would like to say here is that you can depend upon the strength of MSMEs of India. They have come a long way. They have really learned a lot from their exposure, because of EEPC has been very much instrumental in organizing buyer-seller meets and then taking the trips abroad, and that really opened our eyes. So we were quick learners, I must say, and it is really creditable that MSME has been able to make significant inroads as far as agriculture machinery export is concerned. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Berry, for outlining the success story of your company. Now, we have one question from Lavanya CNM. She wants to know, she writes that going by the 7S framework of McKinsey, though hard elements may be fulfilled, any strategic change management requires change in soft elements, such as skills, staff, and so on. So what are the measures to be undertaken to ensure that MSMEs adapt to the disruption in regional value chains? Lavanya, can you mention whom you want your question to be answered from?
Ma'am, it's open to any of the panelists because it's at a generic level. So, what are the measures to be taken such that the systemic issues are addressed at the MSME level? Because the technologies keep changing, but once the generic issues like softest framework of McKinsey are addressed, then whatever be the international and global changes, they can quickly adapt to them. So it's open to any of the panelists, ma'am.
I would request one of the experts to take this question, if possible.
Yeah, okay. I'll just maybe we can take questions in one go, and then one by one it can be answered, or you want to. Sorry. There are other questions. Maybe you can take if there are other questions.
Bombay Metal House has a question: how to create blue ocean in export?
Okay.
So probably you can answer both the questions together.
Yeah, with your permission and with the permission of other panelists, I would like to just respond to the first question and maybe the second as well.
Yeah.
And, then other experts can add to it. So, see, the McKinsey framework that Lavanya talked about, basically we talk about the strategy, the structure, and the systems, right? And then there are skills and shared values and the staff issues which are there. All these are part of the the 7S framework that is there. The point that is actually the point that I was trying to make when I said that we are not talking only about the macroeconomic enablers. We are actually talking about two more enablers at least, and they are the geo-economic enablers and the strategic enablers, right? In the geo-economic enablers, for example, when we talk about things like strategy, structure, and systems, right? When we are talking about these type of things, so what are those strategies, what are those structures, and what are those systems? So from the macroeconomic perspective, we of course know that there is a infrastructural development, right? We talk about labor market development, then we talk about the domestic productive capacity, right? So we also talk about diffusion of the information and communication technology, the development of the global production network, or the participation of the transnational companies and the lead firms which I have talked about. So all these factors can be actually aligned with the 7S framework also. All those 7S can be, these factors which I have been mentioning can be aligned with the 7S framework. For instance, we also talked about internationalization and export orientation of the firm, right? So when you talk about internationalization and export orientation, of course, this is part of the strategy. When you talk about the labor market development, this is part of the staff. When you talk about the organizational learning capabilities, actually that is part of the shared value that is there in the organization. So it can very well be related to that, right? So all those factors, if you do a meso level analysis, you don't consider only the macro or you don't consider only the micro, but you make a mix of those, then it can be well integrated with the 7S framework. The other question was about blue ocean strategy, right? Now, blue ocean strategy, see, I mean, you talk about the issue of hyper competition, which was given by Richard Devaney, and you talk about blue ocean strategy. It's about creating a niche for yourself. Dr. Jayant also talked about, value chain upgradation. The other speakers have also mentioned about these aspects. So when you talk about value chain upgradation, and as I also mentioned that now, countries of ASEAN, low-income countries of ASEAN, you talk about even Cambodia or even the middle-income countries like Vietnam, they are actually taking those type of positions in the lower end of the value chain where we have been staying for a long time. So it is high time that once they start taking these positions, they become more competitive because they are already part of the RCEP now. And some of them are part of the, like Vietnam is part of the TPP as well. So therefore, if we start upgrading the value chain, then we enter into those type of strategic orientation where we have moved ahead of a competition, industry competition, where we stayed for a long time till now. So we need to move ahead of that. Only then these blue ocean strategies, etc., can be applied to it. Other experts can add if they want.
Chair, perhaps I can say a few things to add to what Dr. Ahmed has already mentioned. I think Dr. Ahmed's covered most of the key points. I guess the general macro level, the challenge for governments is to rethink the whole education system to increase the flexibility of the labor market to respond to these sorts of changing needs. So we've heard about the micro firm level changes that need to happen earlier today from Mr. Subhash, but also just now from Dr. Ahmed. But at the macro level, I think governments have to rethink education systems and think about lifelong learning, or rather learning how to keep learning and to prepare the workforce to deal with continuous changes that the fourth industrial revolution implies. And this is something that needs to come from the top levels of government and filtered through down to all our educational institutions and technical training institutions that form the core of any firm, big or small, right? Having staff that are very flexible. The days where you learn a set of skills, like I did when I was at university, and then hope that it will keep me employed for the rest of my life, are gone. The new generation can no longer do that because of the very rapidly changing needs of firms because of the fourth industrial revolution. And just on this, on this global value chain upgrading, I think, as Dr. Ahmed mentioned, it is something that is often emphasized, and countries often get very irritated or impatient with the long delays in moving up this value chain, and they start questioning the benefits to the local economy of participating in these sorts of value chains when there appears to be very little spillover. Even my home country, Malaysia, which has been in this game for a very long time, in Penang, as I mentioned earlier, is a success story, I think, of electronics upgrading. But still, I mean, you find, that this only in niche sectors. Broadly speaking, electronics in Malaysia involves imported technology, imported capital, tax holidays that are often renewed. So there's very little in the form of government revenues or contribution to tax revenues of the local government, and now foreign workers mostly, right? So you have to wonder where the benefits lie to the domestic economy, and that's a legitimate concern. When labor, capital, technology, and tax are all, going to non-local sources. But then, through persistence and patience, we have seen quite a number of local firms develop, supplying the supply chain inputs that, again, gradually over time have increased in value addition. So it's very important to persist. The policy settings have to be right, and I think Malaysia started off with very good policy environment, but that has eroded also over time, and that is why we haven't seen more rapid upgrading. And maybe Thailand has actually stuck with a better set of policies for a longer period of time, and so their auto sector in the eastern seaboard, Eastern Economic Corridor, has seen more domestic SMEs emerge, supplying the multinational automakers that have emerged, that have moved to their country as an export hub. So again, persistence and patience, but the policy settings need to be looked at on a regular basis. And one such thing is also creating the soft skills, the software, right? The right skills that can supply the firms that need them to remain competitive in the supply chains. Sorry, I've spoken longer than I planned to, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Medin, for enriching the answer with your remarks. This brings us to the close of the session on strengthening the role of MSMEs in the India-ASEAN regional value chain. I now invite Mr. K. Manikam, a working committee member, to present the vote of thanks. Mr. Manikam, please. Mr. Manikam, can you hear me? I think he has lost connection. Yeah, I extend the vote of thanks to our eminent panelists for this session. And the session's importance lies in the fact that it looks into scope of MSME collaboration between India and the ASEAN countries. Both India and its ASEAN counterparts have strong MSME presence, especially in the engineering sector. And MSMEs contribute significantly to the economic development of India as well as the ASEAN region. It also plays an important role in the engineering exports from India to the entire world. At the same time, in the current scenario, the importance of regional value chains cannot be denied. Given the fact that both India and ASEAN share large border, a regional value chain between India and its ASEAN counterparts will be very beneficial for the growth of MSMEs of both sides. This is especially true for engineering because of the well-established parts and accessories trade between India and ASEAN. Given this background, discussions regarding prospects of SME collaboration through creation of regional value chains involving all relevant stakeholders from both sides is of utmost importance. I should mention at this point that today's session has given us further food for thought regarding SME collaboration through regional value chains between India and ASEAN. I thank Dr. Menon, Dr. Shashidharan, Dr. Ahmed, and Mr. Bansal, all for their extremely valuable remarks for the growth. Thank you so much for your presence and taking out valuable time to enrich us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.